Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is The Take on this Wednesday, this shortened week. And I'll tell you what, the guys at Market Rebellion, we're all excited about things because as we approach the end of the year, we've been looking at an unbelievable year for trading and trading volumes. And we talk about this all the time. We had a really interesting jittery day yesterday. Markets kind of shifting around a little bit. We started off pretty strong. Markets looked like they wanted to maybe start a nice sprint to the upside. They were up about 160 points or so on the Dow. You had the NASDAQ up about 50 points, S&P up about 15 points. And then about midday, we started to see a little bit of a sell-off, a little bit of a cascade. Suddenly, we shift around. We're looking at Dow down about 75 points. You look at the NASDAQ down about 40 points. And the S&P, of course, following as well, down about 5 points. So some definite shifting around, people trying to figure out whether or not into the end of year, what sort of movement we would see there. Maybe a little bit of selling added to that whole idea. So a lot of different theories out there. Of course, I don't know that I always like to go with those theories. I think a lot of the time people are just trading the markets in front of them and they're seeing what they feel on that specific day. So it might be interesting, and we have a pretty decent bounce today. Some of the areas yesterday that were leading us lower, we had the industrial space, that was down about 1%. Energy and materials that have been also a pretty decent market leader of late, that was down a little bit as well. Oh, and by the way, biotech. Even though we had the one green area was in healthcare, but then when you shift over and you look a little bit more into the depth of things, you suddenly look over at the XBI and you see it down pretty significantly yesterday, down about 3%. And that's been an area that's been very, very strong and part of, as we've talked about many times, part of what's been going on in terms of the NASDAQ strength. By the way, yep, I see a few questions coming in already. And you're more than welcome to add a couple of those. We're going to be a little bit faster today because I will be on the halftime report as well today, and should be a lot of fun. I got a new location that we're pretty excited about as we've been traveling the country, and now we've sort of slowed down, but I think you're going to be excited about that. So if you want any guesses, you can throw them in there, and if you're right, maybe I'll tell you. But we actually finished the day down near some of those lows as we were talking about. And as a matter of fact, the Dow finished down about 60 points, NASDAQ down about 30 some odd points, and the S&P. But again, this was after all-time highs. We continue to see these indices start to shift to the upside. Maybe we sell off, maybe we kind of get a little bounce around and so forth like we've been seeing. But we continue to, at least at some point in the day, seem to be hitting all-time highs on a daily basis. And that's really been impressive. And you just do wonder when and if we will see some sort of a dramatic pullback. And basically, we're not necessarily seeing the options market telling us the time frame for that, because the one thing that led us into today was very end of the day yesterday, a very big, a monstrous trade was put up in the spiders. And if you go back to October, you can see that there was some significant buying of the January upside calls in the spider. Boy, were they ever right. Matter of fact, shoot, I don't know that I have it in front of me, but I think the spider back at that point in time was significantly lower, and there was this big buyer. Well, they're rolling out of those January calls and now purchasing the February calls, and obviously having to go up a little bit further. So taking some profits off the table, but still want to be in a bullish trade. 34,000 of those they were the Jan 365s. And that was a pretty amazing feat to be able to get to those levels from where we were coming from in the spider. It happened. And now with the spider hanging right around 371, we got a buyer of February 382 calls. 34,000 of those, around $5. That's a monster trade. So something to keep your eye on. And obviously we start off today. We look at the pre-market, we're up 50, 60 points on the Dow. The NASDAQ actually moving up pretty nice as well, actually up about 50 or 60 points percentage-wise, about double that of the index, the Dow itself. S&P was up about 10. So kind of a whole hum start so far. But then as we got a little bit further and we started off the day and we moved to the first half hour or so, we were starting to see a nice acceleration to the upside. Dow was up 100, then 125, then close to 150 now. You've got the NASDAQ still holding them around about a 50-point gain to the upside. S&P up about 15 points. So a pretty strong early start for the markets. Doesn't mean things can change in a hurry, because they certainly can. And we've watched that happen on many occasions where we see sort of that midday sell-off And sometimes we've seen recovery, sometimes we haven't, but we have been talking about and seeing this continued move to the upside where we continue to have all-time highs being hit across all the major indices, so it seems. So early on today, what's really pushing things? Energy. Take a look at energy. It was up about 1% early on. It's probably up a little bit more now, but it's all the usual suspects. And you can even add in Chevron, Exxon, really nice moves to the upside, but you've got some of those beta names that are really fueling a lot of this right now with Devon Energy and Valero and Marathon and Phillips 66. So you've got a nice big part of the energy complex that's moving to the upside. Materials as well. Materials off to the races. Vale a little bit less and actually in negative territory, but take a look at Cleveland Cliffs. Take a look over at Freeport McMoran. That looks like it's absolutely been exploding. Probably hasn't been talked about enough. We've talked about it here because we've seen a lot of unusual option activity in FCX for a pretty long period of time now, at least going all the way back to November on this run. We have seen rolls and buys, and matter of fact, we're even seeing some option activity in Freeport today on the very, very short term. So a lot going on there, I think, in the material space. I still am a believer and still think that there's strength there as well. Both Freeport and Cleveland Cliffs today up about 3.25% or more. Really, really solid move to the upside there. Industrials, financials, participating as well. You got Goldman moving, Capital One's moving, JP Morgan. So you're getting a nice financial push to the upside. And I mentioned the industrials. How about Caterpillar up about 2.5%? Dow is up about 1%. So we are seeing the industrials start to make a little bit of a move as well. So we've talked about energy, industrials, financials finally getting a move on. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today as well. We're starting to see that be part of the backbone of what we're seeing to the upside of this rally. Semiconductors as well. Semiconductors very, very strong today. You take a look over at the SMH, that's having a nice move to the upside. And it's a lot of the big, not necessarily the sexy names, but this is a different part of the semiconductor area. You look at Lam Research, you look at KLAC 10 Core, you look over at Applied Materials, those kind of names are really what's leading right now in terms of the semiconductors to the upside. You still got some strength from Marvell and from Micron and from Skyworks, of course, as well. But we are seeing it more in the other side of the semiconductor space. So a quick unusual option activity for you today. We've got Western Digital kind of sticking into that sort of technology, storage, and all the rest of that. So Western Digital, pretty nice stock trading right around 48.5. This is a little bit bigger premium trade than I usually like to throw out there, but 4,000, and they're going out to February, which I like seeing. It's not every single trade, although it feels like it, is expiring tomorrow. So much paper that we are seeing right now is expiring December 31st. And that obviously very, very short term. For if you're a trader, it's great. But if you're anything more outside of just that flex reaction type trading, this is really, really not your style. So this one is, because you're going out to February, the February 50s, about 4,000 of these calls being bought for about a little over $3, about $3.20. So we'll see. Stock was trading right around 48.5 at the time. So some nice activity out there as well. We've got a really surprising start again today. I look back to yesterday. We did get that spike in the volatility index. We got up and over that 23 level. Today we've pulled back just a little bit off of that, but 31 million contracts again yesterday. So the volumes just continue to be here in the derivative space. I'm shocked myself because I continue to think, well, one of these holiday weeks maybe will slow down a little bit. We have not been slowing down. So that's going to be interesting to see when and if we see that, or is this going to continue to escalate to the upside? Because we certainly have had November and December have been extremely strong months in terms of the volume and the derivatives markets themselves. Just incredible numbers each and every day and each and every week. So we'll see if that can continue into January. So a couple of quick questions. What do you see? Are you still in those GE calls? Actually, I was in GE puts. I was not in GE calls. I was in GM calls. I had GE puts for a really long time. Those worked out well. That was that move that we saw last year specifically, where it really started to cascade to the downside. We saw the stock moving as it was coming down from the 30s down into the single digits. I had one last trade in there because I was rolling down that entire way. Those finally expired on me. So I no longer have those GE puts. You may have been referring to the GM calls. If that's the case, those are the calls that I still do own. Yes. Let's see what else we got. Why did you sell DraftKings? I can tell you why. I owned that for a really long period of time, really liked the name. I also put in some calls where in Penn where I've preferred to trade the options there, and I preferred to trade DraftKings, the stock. I sold so many different times in there. Stock had appreciated so well for me. I am not negative at all. But part of the reason that I sort of stepped away for now was it kind of dried up in terms of the option activity that we had been seeing. We had been seeing monster option activity in there and rolling and going higher and higher and higher. We just haven't seen as much of that recently, and I decided there were a couple of names that I might sort of shift around a little bit. I love the name. If we start seeing some of that activity come back to DraftKings in a big way, I will obviously be right back in it. I'm not sure if I'll still be in the stock or the calls. That'll be determined on what the implied volatilities look like. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to that. What do you think about Intel? Unbelievable story yesterday. We'll be talking about that on the halftime report today as well. I totally agree. I don't always agree with Dan Loeb, and believe me, I understand these guys are geniuses. They do an unbelievable job. They've got incredible sums of money within their funds and so forth, and Dan being one of those, third point. I would agree with them. I've been frustrated, and you've heard me talk about this for a long period of time. First of all, I was frustrated in the selection for the new CEO of Intel. I thought they went in the wrong direction there. Nothing against the gentleman who they did select, but I just thought there were better candidates within the Intel company to run them, something more similar to what we'd seen out of Microsoft with Satya Nadella running their biggest growth area. And I felt the same thing should have happened at Intel. It did not. I still love the name, but I just don't think that they are managed properly. Well, looks like Dan Loeb thinks the exact same thing, and they're kind of in there shaking things up a little bit. So we will see. I believe they put in a little over $1 billion into Intel, so it's pretty significant investment, and we'll see how this plays out. I was on the fence and debating it, but at this point in time, I'm going to hold on to my stock position, continue to sell stock, or excuse me, calls against that long stock position. Hey, Pete, I really appreciate what you guys do every day. I appreciate you, Ryan. Thank you. What market rebellion services options would you suggest for someone who just trades calls, puts, options? I think a lot of our different services here at Market Rebellion can fit that sort of a category, Ryan. I would say it's more about the level and how active somebody wants to be, because we have all sorts of different services. And they're all great. They really are. But the difference in many of them is, in some cases, are you more of a beginner or intermediate? Are you advanced? That's one. The other is, are you in front of your computer all the time, every day, essentially? Those are the elite guys, because they are very, very active. And that is where we see the majority of all the unusual option activity that we talk about each and every day. And obviously much more than that when we finish the end of the day, probably on average anywhere from 25 to 30 or 35 different entries on the day, usually hitting there. Then there are other services that actually offer a smaller amount of information, and that's just so that you don't get overwhelmed and maybe you're not in front of your computer as much. So it really depends on your personal position. Your take on Snowflake. Happy New Year's to you and John. Christine, thanks, Christine. It's really awesome. I'm out of it. I think a lot of these names had incredible runs to the upside. I think a lot of them were probably overheated. We talk about that all the time, and I think you don't want to be the last person standing. And I think when you look at some of these names that have absolutely rocketed to the upside, if you were lucky enough to be on any part of that ride, I think it's okay to maybe sit back and watch for a little while and see how things adjust, especially we know how fast things are moving in the markets each and every day. So I think that as we've seen Zoom, as we've seen Peloton, as we've seen a lot of different names, and some are still holding some of those levels, some have given back a lot. So you just don't want to be stuck holding the bag. And so if you've had good trades, we talk about discipline all the time, I think it's okay to back off and wait and see if, in my perspective, always looking for, are we seeing option activity in there? We have not seen it in a lot of these, of those names that are those names, those stay-at-home names that really rocketed to the upside. We have not seen the option paper return for a while. And so that's been the impetus for me to make a move, and we haven't seen that. So it's been very helpful, because it's helped me avoid getting into some of these names that continue to drop to the downside. Last thing I got, let's see, guy, got a lot of them. It's great. How are you feeling about Riot? You know, it's definitely an interesting one. It hits on a fairly frequent basis. This is Riot blockchain. So I think this is a full trading thing for me. And that's all I do when I get into Riot. I've only traded the options. I have not been involved in the stock itself, but we've certainly had some great runs in the options, and they've moved pretty fast. And this is another one of these that can absolutely rocket very rapidly to the upside. And I think you've got to be on top of it. You've got to be very, very disciplined in some of these names because they can move and they give you the opportunity. And I think you've got to seize that opportunity. And there's a lot of names like that out there. There are a lot of comfortable names where you feel a lot more at ease when you're watching some of the movements, but there's definitely some stocks that have incredible volatility, and the implied volatility of those options can be really high. Guys, got to go. I hope you have a really great day of trading. Tune in at halftime. We'll have some unusual option activity there. We'll be talking about Intel, Dan Loeb, and all the rest of it as well. So it's going to be a pretty good show. It'll be fun, and I'll be from a really interesting destination here in Lincoln, Nebraska today. So maybe that's a hint. Have a great day.